know the look. That polite, dead-eyed stare a receptionist gives when they've already decided you don't belong in their building. Nora knew it well. She was standing outside the glass walls of power, clutching a cardboard tube of blueprints, about to learn that money doesn't just talk, it builds fortresses. The 60th floor of Reed Enterprises smelled like ozone, expensive espresso, and ruthless efficiency. It was a sterile, airless kind of perfection. Nora Hayes sat on a minimalist leather bench that looked like a modern art sculpture and felt like concrete. She adjusted the strap of her tote bag, shifting it off the dull ache in her collarbone. At 32, Nora's life was an endless series of shifts and adjustments. Shift the budget to cover Leo's emergency dental bill. Adjust the project timeline because the daycare closed early for a pipe leak. Shift. Adjust. Survive. But today wasn't about survival. Today was supposed to be the breakthrough. In her lap rested a battered cardboard tube. Inside were the finalized blueprints for the Westbridge Community Hub, a sprawling, multi-use development designed to revitalize a forgotten industrial neighborhood without displacing its current residents. It was brilliant. It was sustainable. It was the kind of contract that would take Nora's 3-person architectural firm out of the red and put them on the map. She had the 10:30 a.m. pitch. She had the data. She had the fire. What she didn't have was the right pedigree. Ms. Hayes? Nora looked up. A woman with an immaculately smooth forehead and a tailored navy suit stood behind the vast marble slab of the reception desk. "Mr. Harrison will be out to speak with you momentarily," the receptionist said, her tone perfectly pleasant and entirely devoid of warmth. Nora offered a tight, polite smile. "Thank you. The pitch is scheduled for 10:30 with the full board. Mr. Harrison will speak with you," the receptionist repeated, a subtle but final closing of a door. Nora checked her watch. 10:42 a.m. The cold dread that had been pooling in her stomach since she stepped off the elevator began to solidify. She knew Greg Harrison. He was the vice president of development, a man who wore custom Italian loafers and viewed anyone with a net worth under $5 million as a mild inconvenience. 5 minutes later, the frosted glass doors of the main boardroom slid open. A low murmur of confident baritone voices spilled out into the lobby, followed by Greg Harrison. He was adjusting his cuffs, smiling back at someone inside the room. When the doors hissed shut, cutting off the warmth, Greg turned. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of strained endurance as he spotted Nora. He walked over, not bothering to offer his hand. "Nora! Hi, look, I'm going to have to make this quick. We're in the middle of the quarterly review." Nora stood up. She was 5'4" in her sensible block heels, forcing her to tilt her chin up to meet his gaze. She didn't step back. "Greg, my presentation for the Westbridge Hub is scheduled for right now. I was told the board was waiting." Greg sighed, the kind of heavy, performative exhale a parent gives a nagging child. He glanced at the cardboard tube in her hand, then back to her face. "Right, about that. The scope of the Westbridge project has shifted. The board is taking it in a different direction. We're going with an in-house firm. More bandwidth, less risk." The words hit her chest like a physical blow. Risk. Risk? Nora kept her voice level, though her hands gripped the cardboard tube so hard the cardboard began to yield. "My designs cut your overhead by 14%. I've secured preliminary zoning approvals that your in-house team couldn't get in a year. The community board actually trusts me. There is no risk here, Greg. There's just a reluctance to hire an independent firm. Be reasonable, Nora, Greg said, his voice dropping to a condescending murmur. He took a half step forward, physically crowding her space. This is a $200 million development. It requires a firm that can dedicate 100 hours a week to it. No distractions. His eyes flicked down to her tote bag, where the handle of a brightly colored plastic toy dinosaur, a remnant of Leo's morning tantrum, poked out of the side pocket. We need people who are fully available, not someone juggling a boutique operation and a chaotic home life. The sheer audacity of it made the air leave her lungs. It wasn't just corporate gatekeeping. It was deeply, violently personal. He was using her son, her status as a single mother, as a metric for her professional competence. My personal life has never missed a deadline, Greg, Nora said, her voice dropping an octave, losing all of its polite customer service polish. I have the best proposal. You know it. I want my 15 minutes in that room. She took a step toward the frosted glass doors. Greg mirrored her, stepping squarely in her path. He crossed his arms. The polite veneer was completely gone now. You aren't going in there, he said, his voice hard. Dominic Reed is in that room. He flew in from London at 3 a.m. He's already fired 2 vice presidents this morning. He doesn't want to see a quaint little community project pitched by a mom-and-pop shop. He wants results. I'm doing you a favor, Nora. Go home. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and Nora saw her own reflection in his eyes. He saw a tired woman in a mid-tier blazer. He saw someone he didn't have to respect. Nora felt the familiar acidic burn of defeat in her throat. She had spent 3 months on these blueprints. 3 months of working until 2 a.m. after Leo went to sleep, surviving on stale coffee and sheer, stubborn will. All of it erased by a man who assumed her motherhood made her weak. Fine, Nora said, her voice dangerously quiet. But when your in-house team fails to get the neighborhood council's approval, and they will, don't call me to fix it. Greg offered a tight, victorious smirk. Have a good day, Miss Hayes. He turned his back on her, walking back toward the boardroom. The glass doors slid open, and he stepped inside. The doors sealed shut, locking her out. Nora stood alone in the cavernous lobby. The silence of the 60th floor pressed in on her, heavy and suffocating. She looked down at the blueprints. She thought of Leo, who had asked that morning if they could go to the Science Museum this weekend. She had told him she'd see if they had enough left over after groceries. She swallowed hard, refusing to let the tears of frustration spill over in this sterile, unforgiving place. She turned toward the elevators and pressed the down button. She just wanted to leave. She wanted to go home, take off her shoes, and figure out how she was going to pay rent next month. The digital display above the elevator blinked. The chime sounded, clear and sharp in the quiet lobby. The polished steel doors slid open, and chaos erupted. The screaming started before the doors were fully apart. It wasn't the polite, hushed stress of corporate America. It was the visceral, ear-piercing wail of a child who has entirely abandoned reason. A young man in a rumpled suit, looking utterly terrified, lunged forward as 2 small, blurry shapes bolted past him out of the elevator car. "No, wait! You can't run in here!" the man yelled, his voice cracking. Nora stepped back instinctively as a little boy and a little girl, both looking to be about 5 years old, exploded into the lobby. They were a bizarre mix of wealth and feral energy. The boy wore a miniature tweed blazer, completely untucked, with a smear of what looked like chocolate across his cheek. The girl wore a ruffled tulle skirt over leggings, her hair a wild, static-filled mane. They were crying, not just whining, full, chest-heaving, red-faced meltdowns. The terrified young man chased them, holding 2 designer backpacks like they were live grenades. "Mia, Sam, please, your dad is in a meeting." The lobby receptionist stood up, her jaw dropping, completely paralyzed by the breach of decorum. The girl, Mia, threw herself onto the expensive Italian leather sofa, burying her face in the cushions and screaming something unintelligible about a tablet. The boy, Sam, was running blind. He had his hands over his ears, sobbing wildly, his little legs pumping as he sprinted away from the panicked assistant. He wasn't looking where he was going. He was just running from the noise, from the stress, from whatever had triggered the exhaustion of a 5-year-old dragged into an adult world. He ran straight toward Nora. "Hey, watch out," Nora started to say. Smack! Sam crashed hard into Nora's knees. The impact sent him stumbling backward. He lost his footing on the slick marble floor and fell hard onto his bottom. For a split second, there was silence, the sharp intake of breath before the storm. Sam stared up at her, his big brown eyes wide with shock. Then his face crumpled. The wail that tore out of his throat was raw, jagged, and full of pure misery. Nora's own cardboard tube slipped from her grip, clattering loudly against the marble. The assistant, David, rushed over, pale and sweating. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Ma'am, are you all right? Sam, come here. Get up. You can't cry here." David reached down, grabbing the boy's arm to pull him up. Sam shrieked, yanking his arm away and kicking his legs out. "No! Leave me alone! I want my dad!" "Your dad is busy," David pleaded, looking frantically toward the frosted glass doors of the boardroom. "Please, Sam, you're going to get me fired." Nora stood there for exactly 2 seconds. She looked at the panicked assistant. She looked at the useless receptionist who was now frantically dialing a phone. She looked at the little boy on the floor, his chest heaving, his little face flushed and wet with tears, completely overwhelmed by his environment. The cynical, defeated professional in Nora vanished. The mother took over. "Stop pulling on him," Nora snapped, her voice cutting through the noise like a serrated blade. David froze, his hand hovering over the boy. I have to get him to the office." "You're making it worse. Back up," Nora commanded. It wasn't a request. She didn't care about her skirt or the marble floor, or the fact that she was currently in the lobby of the men who had just ruined her quarter. She dropped down to her knees, placing herself directly at Sam's eye level. "Hey," Nora said. Her voice dropped an octave. It was the voice she used when Leo woke up from a night terror. It wasn't high-pitched or coddling. It was low, steady, and an immovable anchor in a storm. Sam kept crying, his eyes squeezed shut. Nora didn't reach for him. She didn't crowd him. She just sat there and picked up her cardboard tube. "That was a pretty hard crash," Nora said quietly, tapping the cardboard tube lightly against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. A steady, rhythmic sound. Sam's wails hitched. He opened one tear-filled eye, distracted by the tapping. "I think you dented my telescope," Nora said, her face completely serious. She lifted the tube and peered through it, aiming it directly at the terrified assistant, hovering a few feet away. "Yep, Definitely dented. I can see a giant, stressed-out monster through it, but his tie is crooked. Sam sniffled, a jagged, wet sound. He looked at the tube. Then he looked at David. "That's David," Sam whispered, his chest still heaving. "Oh, well, David needs to fix his tie," Nora said smoothly, lowering the tube. She met the boy's eyes. "I'm Nora. What's your name?" Sam, he hiccuped. "Nice to meet you, Sam. Are you hurt, or are you just really, really mad?" It was the magic question. Nobody ever asked kids if they were just mad. Adults only ever told them to quiet down. Sam's lower lip trembled. "I'm mad. David took my iPad, and we had to leave the car, and I didn't get to finish my game, and I want my dad." "That sucks," Nora said simply, nodding in solidarity. "I hate when my games get interrupted. But you know what?" She leaned in just a fraction. "Screaming on this very hard, very cold floor isn't going to get your iPad back. It's just going to give you a headache. Do you want a headache?" Sam shook his head slowly. Over on the couch, Mia had stopped screaming and was now watching them. Her thumb hovering near her mouth, Nora held out her hand. Flat, palm up, an offering, not a demand. "How about you help me up and we go tell David to fix his tie?" Sam looked at her hand. He sniffled once more, reached out his small, sticky hand, and placed it in hers. Nora gripped his fingers and stood up, pulling him gently to his feet. She didn't let go of his hand. She simply stood there, a grounding force, letting the boy catch his breath. "Incredible!" a voice breathed behind her. Nora turned. The frosted glass doors of the boardroom were wide open. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he carried the weight of a small country on his shoulders. He was tall, over 6 feet, wearing a charcoal suit that was impeccably tailored, but currently rumpled, as if he'd been wearing it for 24 hours straight. His dark hair was slightly messy, pushed back by hands that had run through it in frustration. He had sharp, striking features, but his eyes were what caught Nora. They were a piercing, cold blue, ringed with the deep, bruising shadows of chronic exhaustion. This was Dominic Reed, the billionaire, the CEO. The man Greg had said was too important for her boutique firm. Right now, he didn't look like a master of the universe. He looked like a father who was losing control. Behind him stood a half-dozen executives in various states of shock. Greg Harrison was among them, his face pale, his eyes darting between Dominic, the twins, and Nora. Dominic's eyes scanned the room. He saw his daughter standing by the couch. He saw his panicked assistant. And then his gaze locked onto Nora, and the small boy currently holding her hand and leaning his head against her hip. Dominic stepped out of the boardroom. The temperature in the lobby seemed to drop 10 degrees. "David," Dominic said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a terrifyingly quiet, lethal drawl. "Why are my children running wild on the 60th floor during a board meeting?" David swallowed hard, looking like he might faint. "Sir, the nanny quit. Texted me 20 minutes ago. I had to go pick them up from the lobby and they got away from me." Dominic pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling a breath that sounded like grinding stones. He dropped his hand and looked at Sam. "Sam, come here." Sam tightened his grip on Nora's hand. He didn't move. He actually hid slightly behind her leg. Dominic blinked, genuinely taken aback. His eyes shifted from his son to the woman whose hand he was clinging to. He took her in. The practical block heels, the slightly wrinkled blazer, the frayed tote bag, and the calm, utterly unintimidated expression on her face. She wasn't looking at him with the reverent fear that everyone else in the building did. She was looking at him with the tired, assessing gaze of a parent who recognized another parent failing at their job. "Who are you?" Dominic asked, his brow furrowing. Before Nora could answer, Greg Harrison stepped forward, nervously adjusting his suit jacket. "Dominic, I apologize. This is nobody. Just a vendor whose pitch we passed on. I'll have security escort her out immediately so you can deal with your family." Dominic didn't look at Greg. He kept his eyes locked on Nora. "A vendor who just managed to do in 3 minutes what my assistant and 2 receptionists couldn't do at all." He tilted his head slightly. "I asked you a question. Who are you?" Nora felt the familiar spark of defiance ignite in her chest. Greg wanted her to disappear. He wanted her to shrink. She let go of Sam's hand and gave the boy a gentle, encouraging pat on the shoulder. Then she reached down, picked up her dented cardboard tube of blueprints, and stood up perfectly straight. "My name is Nora Hayes," she said, her voice clear and carrying through the silent lobby. "I'm the principal architect at Hayes Design, and I'm the nobody who was just barred from presenting the Westbridge Community Hub to your board because your VP of Development believes being a single mother means I lack the bandwidth to manage a commercial project." A pin could have dropped in the lobby and sounded like a gunshot. Greg made a choked, strangling noise. "Now see here, Nora, that is a complete misrepresentation." Dominic held up a single hand. Greg snapped his mouth shut. Dominic stared at Nora. The coldness in his eyes shifted, fracturing slightly, to reveal a sharp, sudden intrigue. He looked down at the dented cardboard tube in her hand, then back up to her face. He saw the fire there, the absolute refusal to back down. "Is that so?" Dominic murmured. It wasn't a question. He looked at his son, who had finally let go of Nora's leg and was wiping his nose on his tweed sleeve. He looked at his daughter, who was quietly walking over to stand next to her brother. Then Dominic stepped back, gesturing toward the open doors of the boardroom. "Well, Ms. Hayes," the billionaire said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "it seems my schedule just opened up. Let's see your blueprints." The boardroom of Reed Enterprises was an intimidation tactic built of glass, steel, and brushed mahogany. It was designed to make you feel small. Nora walked in, the dented cardboard tube under her arm. She didn't look at the half-dozen men in tailored suits who were scrambling back to their leather chairs. She looked at the table. It was expansive, empty, and waiting. Behind her, footsteps padded softly against the plush carpet. Sam and Mia had followed them in. David, the assistant, hovered at the door, vibrating with anxiety. But Dominic waved him off with a flick of his wrist. "Sit," Dominic told his children, pointing to a suede corner sofa. They sat. They looked terrified of the room, their earlier meltdown replaced by wide-eyed apprehension. Nora walked to the head of the table. She didn't wait for permission. She unscrewed the plastic cap of her tube, pulled out the rolled blueprints, and flattened them across the mahogany. The paper remembered its shape, curling at the edges. She grabbed a crystal water glass and a heavy silver pen from the table to weight the corners. "The Westbridge Hub," Nora began, her voice steady. "Your current in-house projections plan to bulldoze the old textile factories and build luxury high-rises. It's standard, it's safe, and it will stall in the city council for 3 years because the neighborhood will fight you tooth and nail." Dominic sat down opposite her. He crossed his arms. He didn't smile. "And your solution?" "Integration. Nora pointed to the center of the blueprint. We keep the brick facades of the factories. We gut the interiors. The ground floors become subsidized commercial spaces for local businesses. The upper floors are mixed-income housing. But the anchor is here. She traced a large open plaza, a community center, a subsidized daycare, and a public green space. Greg scoffed loudly from the side of the table. A daycare? You want to turn a $200 million development into a playground? Dominic, this is exactly what I meant by... Quiet, Greg, Dominic said softly. He didn't even look at the VP. His eyes were glued to the blueprints. Where is the ROI on subsidized commercial space, Ms. Hayes? I run a business, not a charity. The ROI's in the fast-tracked approval, Nora shot back, not missing a beat. You get the zoning permits in 6 months instead of 36. You save $40 million in holding costs and legal fees alone. Furthermore, integrating the community drastically lowers tenant turnover. People don't leave neighborhoods that support them. Your long-term yield goes up 12% over a 10-year projection. Dominic leaned forward. The exhaustion in his face seemed to recede, replaced by the sharp, analytical focus of a predator eyeing a very interesting meal. From the corner sofa, Sam whimpered, "Dad, I'm thirsty." The tension in the room snapped. Several board members grimaced. Greg rolled his eyes. Dominic's jaw tightened, the stress of the morning threatening to pull him back under. He opened his mouth to tell his son to wait. Nora didn't hesitate. She grabbed an untouched bottle of sparkling water from the center of the table and poured a few inches into a clean glass. She walked over to the sofa and handed it to Sam. "It has bubbles," she warned him gently. "Drink it slow, or it'll tickle your nose." She turned to Mia, who was staring at the floor, picking at her tulle skirt. Nora reached into her frayed tote bag. She bypassed the blueprints, the budget spreadsheets, and her emergency makeup bag, pulling out the bright green plastic dinosaur. She held it out to the little girl. "His name is Barnaby. He eats strictly corporate documents. Watch out." Mia blinked, a tiny, hesitant smile breaking through her sullen expression. She took the dinosaur. Nora walked back to the table and met Dominic's gaze. The billionaire was staring at her as if she had just performed a magic trick. "You were saying about the traffic flow?" Dominic prompted, his voice slightly softer than before. "Right," Nora said, tapping the blueprint. "Your current design isolates the pedestrian pathways. It's hostile architecture. It looks good on a rendering, but it fails in reality because it ignores how humans actually move. People with strollers, people carrying groceries, people rushing to work. They take the path of least resistance. My design widens the central artery. It flows. It lives." She pitched for 20 minutes. She didn't stumble. She didn't use flowery jargon. She gave them hard numbers, brutal realities, and a vision grounded in actual human experience. When she finished, the room was silent. Dominic stared at the blueprints for a long, heavy minute. He traced the line of the central plaza with his index finger. "Greg," Dominic said, breaking the silence. Greg sat up straighter, looking eager. "Yes, sir. As I said, it's a nice little idea, but the bandwidth—" "Pack up your office," Dominic interrupted. Greg froze. The blood drained from his face. "Excuse me." "You heard me." Dominic finally looked up, his blue eyes cold and flat. "You are going to pass on a design that saves us $40 million in holding costs because you felt threatened by a woman whose life is more complicated than your golf handicap. You lack vision, Greg. And I don't tolerate blind spots in my executives. You're done." The silence that followed was absolute. Greg opened his mouth, closed it, and stood up. He walked out of the room without looking at anyone. Dominic turned his attention back to Nora. The coldness vanished, leaving behind something that looked remarkably like respect. "Your firm is 3 people," Dominic said. "It is," Nora replied, keeping her chin high. "You'll need to hire at least 10 more architects to handle the drafting for a project this scale. I will front the capital for your expansion. Reed Enterprises takes a dedicated oversight role, but Hayes Design remains the principal architect of record." Nora's breath hitched. She dug her fingernails into her palms to keep her hands from shaking. It was everything. It was the firm's future. It was Leo's college fund. It was the end of the crushing, suffocating panic at the end of every month. "I can have the expansion plan and the revised contracts to your office by Friday," Nora said, her voice perfectly even. "Make it Monday," Dominic said. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked over at the sofa, where Mia was quietly making the plastic dinosaur stomp across the suede cushions, and Sam was falling asleep against his sister's shoulder. Dominic looked back at Nora. The billionaire mask slipped, just for a second, revealing the deeply tired father underneath. "Take the weekend, Miss Hayes. Take your kid to the park. I plan on taking mine." Nora smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Good luck, Mr. Reed. They're fast." "I'm learning that," he murmured. He extended his hand across the mahogany table. Nora took it. His grip was firm, grounding, and completely devoid of the condescension she had faced an hour ago. They were just 2 people who knew how to build things, and how to survive the wreckage when things fell apart. Nora packed up her blueprints. She didn't feel the ache in her shoulder from the heavy tote bag anymore. As she walked out of the glass doors and into the elevator, she pressed the button for the lobby. She was going home. And for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't just surviving. She was building. Did Nora's boardroom triumph make you want to cheer? Sometimes the biggest risks aren't in the boardroom, but in underestimating the sheer force of a mother with nothing to lose. If you loved watching Nora tear down those corporate glass walls and build her own empire, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who knows the grind of proving them wrong. And don't forget to subscribe for more deeply human, fiercely emotional stories.